Everything modern agriculture taught you about spacing plants is completely wrong. Medieval peasants with zero technology grew more food per square foot than most backyard gardens today. They knew something we forgot, something that makes our neat, organized rows look almost embarrassing. And the craziest part? It takes half the work. Medieval farmers figured something out that most modern gardeners completely ignore. They divided their land into 3 rotating sections. One grew spring crops, one grew fall crops, and the third, it just sat there doing absolutely nothing. Sounds lazy, right? But here's the thing. Villages using this 3-field system produced 50% more food than their neighbors still using the old 2-field method. 50%. That's the difference between surviving winter and not. Now, you're probably thinking this only works on sprawling farmland. It doesn't. I've used this exact rotation in a 5-square-foot raised bed, and it works identically. The secret is what happens in that resting section. Medieval peasants called exhausted soil dead ground. Dramatic, sure, but they weren't wrong. Soil that grows the same crops repeatedly becomes about as nutritious as cardboard. So here's how you shrink this down. That resting section in your tiny bed becomes a compost zone. Bury your kitchen scraps there. Coffee grounds, vegetable peels, eggshells. The soil rebuilds itself while you harvest from the other sections. The timing matters more than anything else, though. Plant nitrogen-fixing legumes like peas first. They actually add nutrients back into the soil. Then rotate in heavy feeders like cabbage that gobble up those nutrients. Finally, let that section recover with a cover crop. 1 bed, 3 distinct harvests per year. My neighbor plants everything at once and wonders why his tomatoes look sad by August. The medieval rotation was their resurrection trick for dead ground. And honestly, soil chemistry hasn't changed in 800 years. What worked for peasants feeding their families works for you feeding yours. But rotation is only half the story. The monks had another technique that multiplied these results even further. Now here's where things get really interesting. Benedictine monks weren't just praying and copying manuscripts. They were growing absurd amounts of food in spaces smaller than your kitchen table. Their secret? Go down, not out. These monks built raised wooden frames, nothing fancy, and filled them with composted manure until the soil reached 12 to 18 inches deep. That's it. That's the whole trick. But why does depth matter so much? When roots can grow downward, they don't need to spread sideways. This means you can plant things 4 inches apart instead of 12. Suddenly, that tiny bed holds 9 plants where you'd normally fit one. I tried spacing lettuce this close my first year gardening and thought I'd made a terrible mistake. Looked like a green traffic jam. But every single plant thrived because those roots were diving deep into that rich soil instead of fighting each other for surface nutrients. The raised edges also trapped heat like a bathtub holds water. Growing seasons stretched 3 to 4 weeks longer on each end. That's nearly 2 extra months of production from the same little patch of dirt. One monastery garden measuring just 6 feet by 4 feet reportedly fed a dozen monk salad greens throughout an entire summer. 12 guys eating salad daily from 24 square feet. The catch? Building soil that rich took years. The monks composted animal waste, straw, kitchen scraps, basically anything that rotted. They understood something modern gardeners forget. Patience builds permanent fertility. You can shortcut this with purchased compost. The monks couldn't. They played the long game and their soil got better every single year. But deep soil only solves half the space problem. What about growing upward? Now, here's where medieval gardeners got really clever with space. They figured out you don't need an orchard to grow fruit trees. You need a wall. The technique is called espalier, and it sounds fancy, but it's basically training a tree to grow flat against a surface like a living painting. Medieval gardeners grew full-sized apple trees in strips just 18 inches wide. That's narrower than most hallways. Why walls specifically? Stone absorbed heat all day, then radiated it back at night. This created a microclimate up to 10 degrees warmer than open ground. Trees that shouldn't survive in England suddenly produced fruit like they were vacationing in France. But here's what most people miss. This vertical principle works for almost everything, not just fruit trees. Beans, peas, cucumbers, tomatoes. Growing up instead of out literally triples your yield per square foot. I tested this myself last summer. One pole bean plant trained up a 6-foot stake, gave me roughly 2 pounds of beans. A bush bean needs 4 times the ground space for the same harvest. Medieval peasants cut hazel sticks from hedgerows every spring for free staking material. No garden center required, just a sharp knife and some nearby bushes. There's another benefit they noticed too. Plants growing vertically get better air circulation. They called the result of poor airflow rotting sickness. We call it fungal disease. Same problem, same solution, just 700 years apart. Makes sense when you think about it. Leaves packed together at ground level stay wet longer. Moisture breeds mold. Lift those same plants into the breeze, and problems disappear. But growing up only solves half the equation. Medieval gardeners also discovered how to cheat the seasons entirely, and that required digging down. Here's where medieval gardening gets genuinely weird. Farmers figured out how to heat their soil without fire, electricity, or any technology at all. They used horse manure, fresh, steaming horse manure. The process worked like this. Dig a pit about 2 feet deep, pack it full of fresh manure from the stables, cover that with 6 inches of good soil. Then plant your seeds right on top. Why does this work? Decomposing manure generates serious heat. We're talking 100 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit for 4 to 6 weeks straight. That warmth radiates upward, turning cold spring soil into a cozy germination zone. And the results were genuinely impressive. Medieval English estates grew melons and cucumbers using this method. In England, where it rains sideways and the sun apparently takes vacation 9 months a year. These were luxury foods that made visiting nobles raise their eyebrows. But timing was everything. You couldn't just throw seeds in immediately. The manure needed about 10 days to cook first. Plant too early, and the heat literally burned your seedlings to death. My grandfather tried this once with fresh chicken manure. Let's just say those tomato plants didn't survive the experience. A hotbed measuring just 3 feet by 5 feet could pump out 30 to 40 pounds of early spring vegetables. Your neighbors would still be waiting for frost to end while you're eating fresh lettuce. Now, there was one significant downside. The smell. Oh, the smell. Monastery records specifically mention placing hotbeds far from sleeping quarters. Monks appreciated early vegetables, but not enough to sleep next to decomposing horse waste. The heat trick is clever, but medieval farmers had another strategy for maximum production. They made plants share space in ways that seem impossible. Medieval farmers weren't scientists. They couldn't explain why certain plants grown together outperform crops planted in isolation. But they watched, they documented, and they figured out something that took botanists another 500 years to understand. Beans planted next to grain produced larger harvests than either crop alone. Not slightly larger, significantly larger. This observation led to what they called guilds, intentional plant groupings designed to help each other survive. The most famous? The Three Sisters. Corn grows tall, providing a natural pole. Beans climb that pole while pumping nitrogen into the soil. Squash sprawls beneath both, its huge leaves shading out weeds and keeping roots cool. Each plant takes nutrients from different soil depths. Each gives something the others desperately need. In a 5 square foot space, one Three Sisters guild produces approximately 25 pounds of food. Corn ears, dry beans, winter squash, all from less ground than a doormat covers. Here's where it gets interesting. Medieval farmers passed this knowledge through handwritten almanacs, grandfather to grandson, mother to daughter. They didn't know beans fixed nitrogen through bacterial root nodules. They just knew it worked. And the hidden benefit nobody talks about? Companion planting reduces pest damage by 30 to 50%. Why? Because mixed plant scents confuse insects searching for their favorite meals. A bug-hunting cabbage gets overwhelmed when basil, onions, and tomatoes surround it. My grandfather called this confusing the enemy. He wasn't wrong. The monks kept detailed records of which combinations succeeded and which failed miserably. Some guilds took decades to perfect, but guilds only maximize space. They don't maximize time. What if you could harvest something from the same spot every single week for an entire season? Most people plant their entire garden in one weekend. Seeds go in, hands get dirty, and then they wait. Big mistake. Medieval market gardeners figured out something clever. Instead of dumping everything into the ground at once, they sowed small batches every 2 weeks. Why? Because guild regulations literally required them to show up at market with fresh produce every single week. No fresh lettuce, no selling spot. Talk about motivation. Here's what they understood that we forget. A head of lettuce doesn't wait around. It's ready when it's ready. Plant 20 heads at once, and you've got 20 heads all mature on the same Tuesday. Good luck eating that before it bolts and turns bitter. But plant 5 heads every 14 days. Now you're harvesting fresh greens from April through October. The math gets interesting in small spaces. A 5-square-foot bed planted once gives you 1 harvest. That same bed using succession planting, you're pulling crops 15 or 20 times per season. It's like the difference between getting paid once a year versus getting a paycheck every 2 weeks. Same job, way better cash flow. And the yields add up fast. Quick crops like radishes take just 25 days from seed to table. Lettuce runs about 45 days. Spinach, maybe 40. Cycle through these continuously, and that tiny bed produces over 100 pounds of food annually from 5 square feet. My grandfather would have called that witchcraft. The medieval trick was simple. Divide your bed into strips. Plant 1 strip while harvesting another. Always have something coming up behind what you're picking. But growing more food is only half the battle. Medieval farmers also mastered keeping it fresh for months without refrigeration. Their secret involved leaving vegetables exactly where you'd least expect. Here's where medieval farmers got really clever about timing. See, most people think the harvest ends when frost hits. Medieval peasants? They knew frost was just the beginning of a different kind of harvest. They'd leave root vegetables like carrots, parsnips, and turnips right in the ground all winter. No digging, no cellars. Just pile a thick layer of straw mulch on top, maybe 8 to 12 inches deep, and walk away. The ground itself becomes a natural refrigerator. Soil temperatures stay between 32 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit even when the air above freezes solid. The roots go dormant but stay perfectly alive, waiting for you to dig them up whenever you need dinner. Why does this matter? Because February was the hunger month. Stored grain running low, preserved meat getting questionable, and there's old farmer Wilhelm wandering outside with a pitchfork, pulling fresh parsnips from frozen ground like some kind of vegetable wizard. My grandfather did this with his carrots. Said they tasted better after sitting in cold ground for 2 months than they ever did fresh. Turns out he was absolutely right. Here's the science medieval farmers discovered accidentally. Frost converts starches and root vegetables into sugars. That parsnip you ignored in October? By January, it's basically candy, noticeably sweeter, almost honey-like. Now the catch. This only works in well-drained soil. Wet clay? Your roots rot instead of storing. Sand or loamy soil? Perfect natural refrigerator. A 5-square-foot bed of parsnips mulched properly provides roughly 15 to 20 pounds of fresh vegetables harvestable through early spring. That's fresh food when nothing else is growing, but storing vegetables underground is just half the equation. Medieval gardeners also figured out how to feed their soil while growing food at the same time. Here's the thing about compost piles. They take up space. Medieval cottage gardeners, they had maybe a 1/4 acre total. No room for a big heap rotting in the corner. So they got sneaky. Instead of piling scraps above ground, they dug narrow trenches between their planting rows and buried kitchen waste directly in the soil. Potato peels, cabbage leaves, fish guts from Friday dinner. All of it went underground. Why does this work better than regular composting? Worms. Underground burial is basically ringing the dinner bell for earthworms, and those little guys are nature's fertilizer factories. A healthy garden bed contains around 25 worms per cubic foot. Each one processes its body weight in organic matter daily, leaving behind castings that plants absolutely love. And the weird part is how fast it happens. Surface compost takes months to break down. Buried waste? Worms and soil bacteria demolish it in weeks. Your tomato plants are eating last Tuesday's banana peels before you've even forgotten you threw them away. But wait, there's a bonus nobody talks about. Those trenches hold moisture like tiny underground reservoirs. During dry summers, gardeners using this method watered 40% less than their neighbors. The buried organic matter acts like a sponge, releasing water slowly to nearby roots. A 12-inch deep trench in a 5-square-foot bed processes 50 pounds of food waste per year. That's 50 pounds of garbage that becomes plant food instead of landfill contribution. My grandmother would have called that making something from nothing. She would have been mostly right. The medieval peasant stumbled onto something modern science now confirms. Soil biology works faster underground, where temperature and moisture stay constant. Speaking of things breaking down underground, there's another medieval trick that squeezes double harvests from the same dirt. Medieval farmers had this clever trick where they'd sneak fast-growing crops between their slow growers, radishes popping up between cabbage heads, lettuce filling gaps around tomato seedlings. They called these catch crops because you literally catch an extra harvest before your main plants need the room. Here's what makes this genius. Radishes mature in 25 days. 25. Your tomato plant is still basically a teenager figuring itself out, and you've already pulled 3 rounds of radishes from the same dirt. It's like subletting your apartment while you're still living in it. The math gets ridiculous in small spaces. A 5-square-foot bed using catch cropping adds roughly 10 to 15 extra pounds of quick vegetables on top of whatever main crop you're growing. That's free food from space you were already using. But here's where medieval gardeners really earned their reputation. They knew exactly which plants tolerated roommates and which ones threw tantrums. Some crops don't mind shade from taller neighbors. Others need full sun, or they sulk and produce nothing. Getting this wrong meant wasted seeds and empty stomachs. French monastery records actually show monks planning these inner plantings on paper calendars. They tracked which spaces would open when, down to the week. Basically, they invented project management software 500 years before computers. The monks knew that Sister Margaret's lettuce needed harvesting before Brother Thomas's beans started sprawling. I tried this last summer with spinach between my pepper plants, pulled 2 full harvests of greens before the peppers even set fruit. Same bed, double the food, 0 extra work after planting. Now, growing all this food is great, but medieval gardeners discovered something that made plants grow 30 to 40% faster without adding any space at all. Medieval farmers figured out something that modern gardeners pay good money for at nurseries. They made their own liquid fertilizer for free. Here's how it worked. They'd fill a barrel with animal manure, add water, and let it sit for about 2 weeks. The result? A dark, concentrated liquid they called manure tea. And yes, it smelled exactly as bad as you're imagining. Worse, probably. But the stuff worked like magic. Plants fed with this fermented brew grew 30 to 40% faster than plants left to find their own nutrients. The reason is simple. Solid compost takes months to break down before roots can access those nutrients. Liquid fertilizer delivers them immediately. It's like the difference between eating a steak and drinking a protein shake. Same building blocks, different delivery speed. The dilution ratio was everything, though. Medieval farmers learned this the hard way. Too strong, and the tea burned leaves right off the stem. Too weak, and you might as well water with rain. Most settled on 1 part tea to 10 parts water. Get it right, and a single barrel could fertilize an entire cottage garden for a full growing season. I tried making compost tea last summer. Same concept, less horrific smell. You steep finished compost in water instead of fresh manure. My tomatoes went absolutely nuts. My neighbors didn't complain about the odor. Everyone won. The medieval version required holding your breath while stirring the barrel every few days. Monastery records showed that novice monks usually got stuck with this job. Apparently, spiritual growth included tolerance for terrible smells. Now here's where everything we've covered comes together. All these techniques, the rotation, the raised beds, the vertical growing, the catch crops, they weren't used separately.